Okay, today in this one, we're going to talk about, does camera gear matter when shooting motorsports? More roll. I quit. Was robbed. Okay, for some reason, talking about camera gear is always a super hot topic online. It sort of sparks a lot of debate. People seem very passionate about whatever side of the topic that they fall on. Overall, a lot of negative discussion around camera gear. People saying, do you need 4K, 6K, 8K, 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second,
120 frames per second?
Just to sort of be clear, the question that I'm sort of posing is, can you get the job done, right, with a little $1,500 camera? Or do you need a full-blown cinema rig to be able to get clients as a freelance motorsports videographer? The answer to that question, at least in my experience, is no. You absolutely do not need expensive gear to get a job shooting motorsports video. Okay, but now I sort of need to show my math and unpack this a little bit. So I'm gonna talk about my experience with clients and sort of what they're after. I'm gonna talk about what you absolutely do need to make it in this industry. I'm gonna sort of go over some of the basic camera specs for cameras that I would consider sort of beginner level. And then I'll tackle the question, if it's not necessary, why do all the professionals have expensive gear? Before you run to the comments to yell at me, my name is Greg. I am a professional motorsports videographer. I have been for 3 years now. I've worked in some of the top series in the United States. I've worked in IndyCar, I've worked in IMSA, I've worked in some World Endurance Championship races. I've worked for manufacturers, including Aston Martin and BMW. And the one thing I can say about all the clients that I've had is not one time have any of them reached out to me beforehand and asked me, what gear are you shooting with? In fact, sort of the very first big client, big professional client that I ever got came from an edit that they saw, a little stop motion graphic edit I made while shooting as a fan at an SRX series race. They saw that, they reached out to me and they said, we want you to come cover the Rolex 24 race for us in January, all because of this little $1,500 camera. And that experience alone sort of leads me to my main point, that the one thing that every motorsport videographer needs is creativity. In this industry, creativity reigns above everything else. Since those early days, I've been hired several times over based on my creativity, but not one time has a client said to me that they hired me over somebody else because of image quality. Different cameras will dictate different types of content you can make. It's important to know the equipment that you have and sort of play to those strengths, right? So if I show up with an iPhone, I'm not gonna be able to get super zoomed in, tight, good quality slow-mo shots of a car that's 100 yards away from me. That you need a big rig for that. What I'm gonna do instead is, I'm gonna spend a lot of time around the pit lane, get the drivers getting in the car, make some cool stuff with the crew working on the car, maybe some pit stops, some fan atmosphere stuff. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do and be creative with that gets you jobs in this industry. After all, this content is generally used on social media. A super creative transition has a much bigger wow factor than a slightly sharper image does. Now, with that said, here are some of the things I would look for if I was first getting into this and I wanted to buy a budget camera. Okay, first, you need a camera that can shoot in 4K. 5 years ago, that would have meant some big, fancy, expensive rig, but now almost everything shoots in 4K. In fact, this little bitty $1,500 body has a 6K sensor that it down samples into 4K. The reason that I like to have 4K, apart from the image quality side, is it gives you a lot of flexibility in post. Every single reel that I've delivered over the past 3 years has been in 1080. Not once have I ever delivered a reel in a 4K resolution. So having a 4K image allows you to sort of crop in, punch in, do some of that dynamic stuff that you've seen in some of my edits. Okay, second, frame rates are not sort of nearly as important as you think they are. There's a lot of YouTube hype around the 120 frame space, and that stuff has its place, but I did not shoot a single 120 frame per second clip last year, so you can't convince me that it's absolutely required to get a job in this field. You need something that can shoot 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, and in terms of slow motion, 60 if you absolutely need it, but it's not a requirement. Now, something else that a lot of people don't use that you don't absolutely have to have but makes a big difference in your quality is a camera that can shoot in some sort of log profile. Most consumer grade cameras have that function now, but shooting in log will save you if you happen to be over or underexposed while you're out in the field. The next thing for me is autofocus. There's a lot of people that say you should be manual or you should be auto. Auto is not professional. The reality is, again, clients don't care. They just want a nice piece, right? And so having a camera that has good autofocus where you can use it in those settings is a huge help, and it cuts down on your time that you have to spend in each corner trying to get the right shot. If you only have the budget for sort of one lens, it has to be a 7 70 to 200. 70 to 200 gets you a lot of good stuff around the pits, and it also has enough focal length that you can punch out a lot on track. There's a lot of people that have like a teleconverter as well, so they can convert that 200 all the way up to 400, but if you can only get one lens, it has to be a 70 to 200. And lastly, the internal audio on all cameras is pretty horrible, especially when you have something as loud as racing. So make sure your camera has a 3.5mm jack and that you can get some sort of microphone on top of that thing. One piece of advice that I've definitely learned the hard way over the years is not to be trapped by gear. I've heard it said all around YouTube, but the best camera is sort of the one that you already own. Don't allow yourself to think that you're one piece of gear away from sort of making it in this industry. Like I said, I got into this industry with a rental lens on this little $1,500 body, and that got me a job at the top level of IMSA only because I was being creative while I was doing it. Now, the sort of hypocrisy of it all, if you don't need expensive gear, then why do all the professionals have it? And the answer is relatively simple. We don't absolutely have to have it to create good stuff. But that being said, we're not trying to handicap ourselves either. We're trying to produce the best content we can for our clients. And while something like creativity does reign supreme, might as well have good image quality while you're doing it. Be passionate, learn your current equipment inside and out, and you'll be able to land clients in the motorsports world, even if it's with this $1,500 camera. All right, that sort of sums up my thoughts on gear. When this video comes out, I'll sort of be packing and getting myself ready to go to Daytona for the Roar and Rolex weekends. If you're interested in following some of the behind the scenes stuff for that, feel free to follow me on TikTok. If you want to see some of my client work and edits, you can follow me on Instagram. Next weekend, I'll post a fun sort of Daytona themed video that I think will be helpful. I appreciate you following along. Feel free to give it a like. We'll see you in the next one.